He had been absent 4 years and 8 months. The year now was 1835. He was told his mother had died the previous year. Upon his return, the property left by his parents were given back to him. Not long after telling the story in detail to his uncle Gustav Osterlin, a man of considerable property, Olaf urged him to help fund an expedition to make another voyage back to the strange land. At first, his uncle Gustav favored his project. Gustav seemed interested and invited Olaf to go before certain officials and explain to them, as he had to Gustav, the story of his travels and discoveries. Could you imagine Olaf's horror and disappointment upon the conclusion of his narrative that papers were signed by his uncle Gustav, and without warning, Olaf found himself arrested and confined to a madhouse where he remained for 28 long years of suffering? Finally, on the 17th day of October in the year of 1862, at the age of 51 years old, Olaf was released. Returning home, Olaf learned that his uncle Gustav was now dead and the friends of his youth were all gone. Olaf, faced with the reality of being a middle-aged man with the only known record of his existence was that of a madman. Picking up the pieces of his shattered life, Olaf instinctively turned towards the harbor where fishing boats in great numbers were anchored, and within a week, Olaf had shipped out with a fisherman by the name of Jan Hansen, who was starting out on a long fishing cruise to the Lofoten Islands. In only a matter of a short few years, Olaf was able to own a fishing brig of his own. For 27 years, Olaf followed the sea as a fisherman, 5 years working for others, and the last 22 years for himself. In the year 1889, Olaf sold his fishing boats and found that he had accumulated a fortune quite sufficient to allow him to retire and spend the remaining years of his life in America. For a dozen years, Olaf made his home in Chicago, Illinois. He then spent the last 7 years of his life in Los Angeles, California, arriving there on March 4th of the year 1901. Then, in his latter years, just before he was ready to die, he told his story about the strange land, leaving maps and drawings to an author named Willis George Emerson to share with the world. The first question I asked myself, was there any record of Olaf's birth? I was unable to find any birth records. The reason being, Olaf was not born at home. He was born on a fishing trip in a foreign country, Russia. The second question, was there any records of Olaf Jansen entering the United States? No records were found in any of my searches in a New York public library. Yet I knew that Olaf Jansen had left his homeland and traveled on a ship to Ellis Island and docked in New York City with all of the immigrants entering America. The third question I asked of myself, was there any records of Olaf Jansen being in Chicago, Illinois? The answer was yes. I was able to find an address and information that confirmed that yes, indeed, Olaf Jansen had arrived and was living in Chicago, Illinois, and the date coincided with the information in Willis George Emerson's author foreword. And there it was, a stroke of good fortune. On the 1892 City of Chicago, Northern District of Illinois Record and Index of Persons Registered of Poll List of Voters on the 5th line was the record for Olaf Jansen. His address, 304 Stephenson Street. Born in Norway, listed as being in America for 3 years, and living in Chicago for 3 years, just as the author Willis George Emerson had written in the book The Smoky God.